you want me to do the hard truth of that, or do you want
Oh,
me to give the
yes.
hard
Give me the
truth?
hard
I
truth.
mean, the hard truth is I mean, it's tough reality, but I think if you're not a consultant, you're going to be a useless salesperson.
And we're live. Isaiah, how you doing, sir?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on. I think we talked way back and you were doing in-person stuff, so I'm glad that there's some benefit to this whole COVID disaster, for me
Yeah,
at least.
man. I set up a whole deal. I got two of these mics and I was like, I'm going to do an in-person podcast. I'm in Austin, but I'm not in Austin. I'm like a half hour north. And it's hard to get people out here. Like if I was right in the city, it'd be easier. I
Yeah.
realized I gotta do it remote. So
Yeah,
um,
well, especially now with COVID, I'm
especially
assuming that.
now. Yeah, especially now. Yeah.
Well,
So
I'm glad you can because we're out in Boston, so it's a little tough for me to fly out there right now.
yeah,
So
yeah, I understand. But you're a podcaster now yourself with the hard truth about B2B e-commerce.
yeah, I actually kind of stole that name a little bit from. There's a guy that has the Hard Truth About Sales
Okay.
podcast. I've seen him on LinkedIn a little bit, and I was like, "What's a good name for the podcast?" We started playing around with names, and I think the reason he had that name is he's trying to give you like the hard truth. It's not like this easy sales job, and that's kind of what we're doing with B2B e-commerce because I think a lot of people get a rude awakening when they get into B2B e-commerce for the first time.
I like the name. It's sticky and it seems like I don't know too much about B2B commerce. I want you to break it all down for me today, but it seems like there's got to be a lot of stuff that is just hard to, there's a lot of hard problems to solve. You're dealing with companies that are bigger, maybe a little older, and so there's probably a lot of tricky things
There's
to
a
figure
lot
out.
of it's a lot more complicated. Like B2C, it's funny because our last guest, he's like, he was only doing B2B, and then he started doing some B2C, and he's like, oh, this is so easy. Like, when you do B2B and then you go to B2C, you're like, that's it. It's just sell to the consumer, add to cart, check out, and like make sure it gets shipped on time, and that's it. Like but with B2B, it's so much more complex because you have like all the operational legacy operations of the business. So, like you said, most of these companies have been around for a long time. They're used to salespeople doing the selling. So a lot of the orders are taken over the phone. They might have some EDI. So they might have all these different ways of taking orders, most of which are not selling on the website. So then transitioning that all to the website is not simple. And there's so many different things like pricing isn't standardized usually. It's not just one price. They might not just pay with a credit card, they might pay with a purchase order. And then all their data is in an ERP system that is not usually very friendly for e-commerce. And getting that kind of working with e-commerce is a lot more complicated with B2B because they have a lot more going on.
Right.
It's like we could spend the whole episode talking about that. So
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's really cool. It's so funny because I was watching The Office. We watched the whole thing through. And there's this episode where there's a new website rollout. And it's all, I mean, this was, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And it's all of this stuff. It's like a B2B thing. It's the salespeople. It's like all
like
this stuff.
like they buy paper online. Is that what it
Yeah, and
is?
it's all the dynamics of the salespeople dealing with the website and all the conflicts and stuff. And I was like, dude, this is
That's
like,
hilarious.
this is all
It's like
current.
a comedy for my
It was
podcast.
perfect. Yeah, it was perfect. But what are yeah, there's so many tangents to go off of there. One of the ones that I noticed you tweeted recently about salespeople that aren't consultants, you said are going to sort of not be as useful. And I was curious to dig into that a little bit. I wasn't sure if that was in the agency context or in the B2B sales context, e-com
Yeah.
sales context, or both.
Do you want me to do the hard truth of that, or do you want
Oh,
me to give the
yes.
hard
Give me the
truth?
hard
I
truth.
mean, the hard truth is, I mean, it's tough reality, but I think if you're not a consultant, you're going to be a useless salesperson.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because almost everything else can be sort of digitized, right? Like you're either marketing, like a lot of sales is really marketing, right? So I think that's going to get more into marketing, lead gen, generating inbound leads, SEO, Facebook advertising, whatever it is, bringing in the demand, right, is going to be more and more that way. Or even this, I don't know if you've heard of outreach.io, but you can like kind of like, it's a little spammy, but you can kind of like target around that. But it's kind of like somewhat automated way of hitting lots of different people, and you getting a little creative with messaging. I would almost lump that all under marketing, right?
Yeah.
Because really you're just trying to like market to people and get them to set up a meeting with you is really what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I think that all sales is kind of gonna that part is gonna all really fall under marketing. And then when they actually want to talk to someone to sell, they're either gonna want to just buy online through e-commerce or SaaS, like more and more SaaS, like a free trial. You might not talk to a sales rep until they're an account manager. And at that point, if you're a good account manager, you're really a consultant, right? Like you should be like, hey, well, you're using this, but you could be using this. And same thing if it's new sales. Like, if I want to talk to someone, I expect them to be able to bring me something that's more knowledgeable than what I have myself or that I
Right.
could just read on a website. So that's where sales is going. And, you either got to adapt to that or I don't know, not be in a good place, I guess, in 10
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, it's true. That is definitely a hard truth. What do you so let's say you're working with a distributor, manufacturer, wholesaler, something like that,
Yep.
and they're trying to work through this, right? They're thinking, well, I've got my sales team. I don't want to impact them negatively. How do they how do they work through that transition process? What advice do you give them?
Yeah, your salespeople should be more valuable with e-commerce. So the biggest misconception is like, oh, what do my salespeople do now that we have e-commerce? They're if all they're doing is taking orders, then they're not good salespeople. They're literally just customer service people that take orders,
Right.
right?
Right.
So basically, that the first thing you should do is talk to sales about what they're like. If first you have to figure out what your problem is. Are you trying to improve customer service so they can take more orders, or are you trying to get more new sales? And I think you have to kind of like prioritize those issues. But let's say you've done a little bit of both and you got the new site up and running, then you need your salespeople to start to use the site as a tool, right? So I mean, a good example of this is B2C companies that are moving into B2B. So Amazon's doing this, Apple is doing this, Wayfair is doing this. We bought stuff on Wayfair. We signed up for a Trellis account. Immediately, I was called by someone like after we bought like two things, and they're
Mm,
like already trying to sell me.
right.
And that's what the role of the salespeople can be: is the website is a tool to find and buy things. But once you bought something, that doesn't mean a salesperson can't call them up and say, "Hey, I saw you bought this chair, but do you know that we have these 10 other, better chairs or whatever it may be, or I can get you a better deal." Or maybe even just teach them how to use the website better, because a B2B website is actually a more complicated experience. Like you might have to set up special pricing. It's like, hey, you're not getting our, B2B pricing. So let me set that up for you. Apple does that where like you actually have to like manually work with them to set that up, and they'll give
Right.
you like a discount on like we buy on ecommerce.apple.com, I believe. It's not
Right.
apple.com.
Oh, okay.
So basically, like the way I would structure a sales team as a B2B company that sells a product like a manufacturer or distributor is I would have two divisions in the sales team. One is new business and one is account management. So new business, your entire job is go find the trellises or whatever your target market is. Let's say it's agencies, right? Like, or, people like me and you call them up and you're like, hey, we can get you the best desks in the world. We have the best like standing desks, and that's all we sell. I don't know. I'm just like making up something that has
Hey.
is sort of relevant. And your job is just get them signed up on the website and get them as a new customer. And if they buy one thing, like you're successful, and then you get commission based on maybe the first 15 months of what they've bought, and you're just constantly trying to get new people to buy. Then you have another division that is account management, and their job is once they've already bought something, how do I grow this customer into, from buying one chair to 100 chairs or 1,000 chairs or whatever you sell, right?
Right.
And so you kind of split it up like that, and then obviously you can have crossover. Like you don't, it's not like everyone that does new business can't do account management and everyone that does account management can't do like you can have some
Some
crossover, but
overlap.
really there's kind of like two functions of sales: getting them to trust your brand and buy from you and sign up, and you maybe the website is part of that because you have to sign up with a B2B account, which might be somewhat of a manual process. Like you might go through like a credit check. Like sometimes you can't just like sign up instantly as a B2B customer. You have to like go through a process that might be handheld by the salesperson.
Right.
So there's that process, and then there's like, well, what happens after they bought one thing or a couple things, right? Like you want them to keep buying. Does
Right.
that make sense? That's kind of like the simplest way. And there's obviously a lot more that you could do, but I think
Yeah.
it's a very simple way to think about sales and how to scale it.
Right. And so then, like, how does that when you have that existing sales team, how does that split between the two roles in particular help them to transition? Is it that there tends to be those two different types of people and you put them where they kind of fit best? Or how does that help when you got these
Yeah.
salespeople that are like, oh, what's going to happen to my commissions? Am I going to make less money? What's my commission
Yeah, you
structure? Like,
definitely don't want to kill the commissions because then salespeople aren't going to want to work for you, and you don't want to lose your salespeople. Like, I think there's still a valuable role for salespeople in B2B, and ideally, the e-commerce site helps you get more value out of them. Like maybe before they could do 1 million, now they could do 2 million or something, right? Whatever, because they don't have to like take orders on the phone, right? Like they don't have to waste all that time,
yeah.
you know, placing orders when they can just have the customer do that for them, basically. So that's one thing. I would say that. The way that, and you could think about this in any business, not manufacturer and distributor, and think about all SaaS companies are the perfect example. SaaS companies never have the same person do new business. That they have account managers, and then they break up their sales teams into different departments, right?
Mm.
They have like the new business guy who's hyping you up and like getting you excited about the product, but usually he doesn't know that much about the product. He's not very technical, and then once you're actually using the product, they get you to someone that's like a little bit more like technical that can like answer questions about the product. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like when, I mean, you built a SaaS product, so you kind of
Yeah,
had to go
I
through
was I was all of those people.
that.
It's a I was the new business guy, the account management guy, the developer guy, all the guys.
But you see how you
Um,
can kind of split that up into those two roles. So a SaaS
yeah,
business does this very well. Typically in a SaaS business, you get the new business guy, he signs you up, you get all excited, and then you're like, well crap, now we don't know how to use this software. Like it doesn't do, he promised all of these things that it doesn't do.
yeah,
And then they bring you over to the account manager who's like trying to fix all those problems. I mean,
right.
Magento does this. Magento has a new business people, and then
Yeah,
they have, that's not the same person who's your account manager,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's really no different in, because just because you sell something that's a physical good or a theoretical software good that
yeah.
is less tangible, it's not a hard good, you know.
Yeah, when it comes to the tools and the platforms, Magento, Shopify, Handshake, all these tools and platforms for that are doing B2B, um, what are some of the tools that you're interested in that are doing, neat things that when it comes to, helping sales reps to cross sell or different things like that? Anything in particular that you're kind of excited about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm definitely excited about this somewhat slow transition to headless. I think headless has a lot of opportunity because, in theory, in an ideal world, if I was a B2B company and I had the money to do it, obviously, money's always an issue, but I would build a headless site and then I would just tie in the specific applications for specific purposes, right? Like, okay, the customer service aspect of my website uses like Zendesk, and certain data uses the ERP. Maybe some things use Magento or whatever else for the different pieces. So you could basically have this like unified front end experience, and then you just kind of like bring in the different back end applications, because the big problem that we see in B2B is that they have a lot of different systems, right? You
Hmm.
have your ERP, which is usually not very good for e-commerce. Then you have this new e-commerce system, then maybe you have a PIM. A lot of these companies are starting to buy PIM, so now you have three major systems. Then they might have a separate CRM system. Now you're
Yeah,
already talking four systems, and then potentially they might have another. You could easily see how they could have 5 to 10 systems, 5 to 10 major systems.
right.
How do you build one unified experience for that? I mean, headless is basically the solution to that. It's just still kind of in its infancy
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
yeah,
So that's one thing I'm excited about. And then there's lots of like tools and products out there that I think are doing well.
yeah. Are you starting to do some of those headless builds yourself at Trellis with B2B
Yeah,
companies?
we're definitely starting to, not as, I would say not quite. I've been pushing our team to try and do more of it. It's like the chicken or the egg, right? Like you kind of have to tell people that you're doing it too. One guy was like, "What if we just didn't tell people and all we did was headless sites?" I was like, "Well, like if they ever try to like leave us, they probably need to know that their site is headless. We can't just like build it headless and not tell them." So we shot that down. We agree that we have to tell the client that it's headless and kind of explain to them why they're doing it. So you have to sell them on it, and that's a little bit difficult. It's still not quite at a point where I think we're confident in doing it cheaper. So generally, it's a little more expensive up front. So that's a little bit of a barrier, and it's hard for a lot of companies to understand the value of paying more upfront for that. we do believe that it will save you money in the long run because you won't have to like re-platform as much, and you'll be able to keep the infrastructure for a lot longer.
Right.
So long term, it should save you money. But I think a lot of companies struggle with the idea of like spending more up front. So we are doing some, but it's that maybe 10% of companies that are willing to kind of invest in the premium, that understand the value of it and are willing to invest more into it.
Right.
So for us, it's still a smaller percentage of the deals that we're working on.
Right. What would you say, like rough ballpark, is the premium that they're looking at? Is it, hey, we're going to spend twice as much up front on
That's a
this,
great question.
save
We're
money in the
trying
long
to get
run?
that down. We believe that we're working on a lot of internal things and tooling, and then also take like evaluating what's out there. There's new stuff every day that's evolving to make it cheaper. I mean, even obviously Magendo's working on PWA Studio. Pretty much what I've realized is all the platform Magento, Shopify, BigCommerce in some ways are like the big three that I think about. They are all working on GraphQL like super aggressively because they know like everyone's going to want to integrate with these things the best possible. So they're all trying to make everything GraphQL across every single piece of functionality. And I think that will all be pretty much available next year across all the platforms, like maybe the end of next year. But
Yeah.
so I would say right now we're kind of like looking at it as like a 50% plus or minus lift. So plus 50%.
Mm.
So let's say we said it thought it was a 100 grand project. We would say headless might be 150. That could potentially be 200. It could be slightly less. Maybe it's only 120 instead of 100. It's definitely, we feel like it's more.
Right.
We're working on a lot of things to make it, our goal is to get it to be 1 to 1. And once we get it to 1 to 1, then we're hoping that there'll be, that, like I said, is about 10%. That's just like kind of like a somewhat of a made up number. It's a small percentage of clients right now. Hopefully it'll be like 50% at some point once it becomes
Right.
like less of a cost barrier.
Right.
And then eventually we believe it'll be 100% of our clients doing that at
Right.
some point. It might
Yeah.
be a while for that, but
Yeah.
that's the goal, the dream,
Nice.
right?
That's the
One can
dream.
dream. That's the dream.
Yeah. What are your favorite, there's View Storefront, there's PWA Studio, there's a lot of these PWA frameworks and platforms.
Yeah, we're still evaluating all of those, to be honest. Basically, like, and you honestly, a better person to answer this question is our director of front end engineering. I think he would say none is the answer. I think at this point we're not like super happy with anything that's out there. So, frankly, we are investing in some stuff ourselves, but we are also using some stuff out there just because, there's some stuff out there like View Storefront and Magento PWA Studio, those two in particular that are, have a quite a decent backing. Like, Magento's backed by Magento and Adobe. So that's a lot of money going to that. And View Storefront's been around for a while, has the open source community. So those two solutions we see fairly competitive. So we're not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel there, but we also have had concerns about some of the things that they're doing that I'm not going to get into in like a super technical. I just know that's the analysis that our team has done.
Snags. Yeah.
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 And then in the Shopify and BigCommerce space, it's a lot simpler. So that's something that we're more investing in ourselves because we want kind of like a simpler, faster to market solution, especially because people in that market expect, you know, a lower cost option. Like typically, if you're going with Shopify or BigCommerce, you aren't trying to spend like $500,000 or something like that,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
There's always exceptions, but
Yeah.
if it's really expensive, it's kind of a so we're investing in building something simpler ourselves in that market.
Yeah. It's interesting with Shopify. They was it Handshake was the B2B platform that they acquired.
Yeah, it's still not very clear what's happening there. It's still like it supposedly exists. Supposedly they're gonna like re-release it into something, but as far as I know, there's nothing right now that you can use. Like there's no you can't I don't think you can use Handshake
Oh, really?
B2B Shopify right now. They
Oh,
have
okay.
this kind of like wholesale portal, but it's not Handshake. I don't think Handshake's been re-released yet. I could be wrong. It's hard for me to keep on top of like every like release of every platform out there, but I'm pretty sure it's not a thing right now.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And you mentioned that Amazon is getting heavier into B2B, right?
Oh yeah, I think people don't realize how fast that's happening. They went from 1 billion B2B to 10 billion in B2B in 1 year. I think that was like 2000.
Wow.
Yeah, they 10x their B2B in 1 year. That was like 2018 or something. And they're
Wow.
projected, it might have been 2000. They're projecting to do like 50 or 60 billion B2B fairly soon. Like they're on track to become the largest B2B e-commerce site in the United States like very soon. It might even be
Wow.
now.
That's why
I think
it
like
just
one of the
happened.
yeah. Yeah, it just it already just they just hit the number. Yeah. Like I think it's like maybe Granger, a couple of these other big B2B companies right now that are up there, and I think they're going to Amazon will I'm pretty certain they will surpass them, in the
Yeah,
next few years.
yeah,
Cuz
that's
it's
wild.
just so like chairs, desks, electronics. I mean, all you have to do is just convert your account to, you could do it right now, probably as a Commerce Hero business account, and it's
Mhm,
the same login. And now you're a business user,
gotcha.
basically.
And then do they just, have, like, more a higher touch process? They have a
Not
account manager?
really, to be honest. I think they do if you're really big. I don't think we're big enough, so I haven't gotten that. Like, I don't have someone like calling me all the time. It's possible. I don't know. I'm like, I don't pick up a lot of those like unknown numbers, so who knows? Maybe they have been trying to call us and we don't know.
Yeah,
But I think that I'm sure they have some more sales rep aspect to it. But I think it's they have like better pricing. It'll even say like business pricing. I haven't noticed like a huge discount, but it's kind of cool. It'll show you like more like business analytics. It's almost got like analytics in it. Like, hey, this is how much you spent for like reporting. So if you're like a procurement person, like, hey, I spent this
right,
much with Amazon. And then they have like these PO capabilities. So you can apply for like 60 days. Like basically you don't have to pay for 60 days PO. So they have like all these different like business capabilities that
gotcha,
I don't think we're using everything. I mean, we don't buy that much. So it's like,
right,
not that a huge saver for us to do that kind of stuff. But if we wanted to get more aggressive,
right,
you know,
right.
with COVID, we don't buy like that much office supplies right now.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
So
yeah. Did you, because you had gotten a new office I wanna say, like, a year or
yeah,
2 ago,
I
something
mean, it's not as new anymore. It's 2018 when we got it. So, or wait, sorry, was it 2018 or 2019? I can't even remember. I think it might have been the beginning of 2019. So we're going on 2 years. I'm in there now, right now, actually. I'm pretty lazy. I go in like once or twice a week. It's hard to get motivated to go in when you're like, there's like three people there and like, I don't have to go in. And,
right.
and now I'm pretty used to working from home. It's not a long commute for me, but it still adds up, right? Like that's just time out of your day that I don't necessarily have to spend driving. So
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the things that you with the podcast, you're talking to a lot of different people. What are some of the things that B2B companies are doing that are the most interesting to you, whether in terms of integrations between different systems, front end experience?
yeah, that's
Um,
a great question. One of the most interesting companies I talked to, and it sucks because I was like on vacation when I did it. So I think it was like really hard. It kept like breaking up in the middle of the podcast. So it's like, it was definitely one of the rockier podcasts, but it's like a really funny story. It's actually a guy who applied to Trellis in like 2012. We had no idea what we were doing. He was in Boston. We stayed in touch. Like, I think we ended up like not hiring him for some reason, but it was like, we stayed in touch, and he is, I believe, from Panama. This is like super random and interesting. And he moved back to Panama. And his family owns a B2B business in Panama. And they're like a decent sized business for Panama. And so he came in and he was like just aggressively trying to make them e-commerce, and just like that's what he believed in. Like, he's like a younger guy like me. And he built this custom, he explored all the options, and he ended up going with a custom headless website that he built himself. Like, he's an engineer, right?
right,
And I think you might have some help. Like, maybe he has a couple people that work under him. So he built a fully custom headless site. And I think it ties into their ERP and other systems, just like I described. You have a headless site that ties into different systems that they use. And he said after COVID, he moved. They used to do zero sales online. Now they do 100% of their sales online.
wow,
Not like 10%, 20%. Like most of these companies are like, we're at 20%. And they're like super excited because they're at 20%. He's at 100% online. So
wow.
everyone buys online and they ship it out, or maybe they come and pick it up in their warehouse or whatever.
What do they
But
sell?
like everything,
Desks.
it's like, yeah, I think they sell all sorts. It's just like one of those general wholesalers that just like, I honestly don't remember their niche specifically, but I think it was pretty broad. Like, they definitely have a pretty large selection of different goods. I think they
Right,
sell to a lot of retailers, so it might be like, home good type stuff. They have stuff like that, but I think it's a pretty broad selection.
right.
Um, So I was like really impressed. He was like getting into like how do we automate pricing with an algorithm. So if you buy more, we give you a better price, but it's all automated because that's the problem with B2B. They all have like these manual pricing mechanisms, which isn't
Right.
very scalable.
Right.
He's getting into the automation of shipping and like how do we like get smarter with shipping costs. And he was like building like algorithms in the back end to like power the challenges that most people do manually,
Nice.
which I thought was like really interesting. We were like, who's the most innovative company you talk to? It's like this guy in Panama, not in the United States.
Just going for it. That's cool. What are
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. What are some of the like challenges for you as an agency in starting to work with these companies that are more B2B focused as opposed to B2C? Is it a different type of company? Is it a different
It's
workflow?
very challenging. It's very challenging. It's so challenging to the point where, like, with B2C, most of our work, to be honest, is Shopify. It could sometimes it's Magento or BigCommerce, but typically they're going to go with Shopify. Like, I literally don't worry about like in terms of like my job is to like make sure we get paid and like make money at the end of the day, right? Like that's like the basic job of the owner of an agency, right? Like if you think about it,
Right.
and B2B has so much risk for us because it's so hard to estimate the projects and execute them well and make sure that you don't blow up the budget and the customer pays you and it's profitable. Like the difference in magnitude is like 10x compared to B2C. So we are getting to the point where like I'm trying to become more and more selective, like, hey, this guy's like too risky. Like we're not gonna work with this company because they have maybe their product data is a mess. There's so many things that they have to do that aren't necessarily just technical problems. Like a good example, and I'm not going to use their name, right? They'll take names out of this. We had a company that ended up firing us, and they were a fairly large distributor. That's all I'm going to say. They're a fairly large distributor. They had like 40,000 products, and we had essentially built them. They had two sites, they wanted multi-site, so they ended up going with Magento, and they decided to go with multi-site, right? We underestimated some things in the estimation process, but that's part of the problem. It's so hard to know how hard is this guy going to be to work with, right? Like, or how hard are some of these things going to be? So there's some things that we underestimated. Anyways, long story short, we essentially, you know, got the site fairly up and running. Both sites, they were designed. You could like click around. It was pretty much all there, but he just couldn't get his product data into a good place. Like he told us in the very beginning they were going to do the product data. Then, like in the middle of the project, they're like, "Well, actually, there was a third party that was going to help them with this. That didn't work out. Then we had to get involved, and it ended up just being like so much more complicated. And he was like having a really hard time understanding our like what we were like because the budget had been blown up for so many different reasons. Mainly, one of them was product data. So we're like, look, we can't. There's no budget for us to do this for you. So like, here's the instructions to like upload the data. Like we gave him like very detailed instructions, and he just like couldn't do it. So there were like all this back and forth, and then we got to the point where like it's literally faster for us to do it, but we were just gonna have to eat that cost because he didn't want to pay more. And that's the challenge too. Is like people in B2B are very they have a hard they have that old school mindset where it's like it's a set in stone budget and it's like it can't change. Like
Right.
you said it was gonna be this price and it like can't change. And like as you know in software, it's like very hard to be
Right.
set in stone with budgets. So, long story short, he fired us, and basically the site was like working. Like it was like you just need to get the product data, and they had a third party integration company that was doing the integration that we were consulting on. But it was really, you know how these like third party integration companies do the ERP integrations. So there was like not much work left for us to do in theory. I always love to like stay in touch to see what happens. Like maybe we suck, right? Like maybe someone else is way better than us, and they just like got the site up and running in a week, and like we suck, right? 9 months later, he hasn't launched the site. He hasn't launched the site. 9 months later, he launches the site. And it was supposed to be like a 6 to 9 month project from start to finish. We probably spent 6 months or whatever it was to get him to that point. Another 9 months for him to take what we did, basically finish uploading the product data and get it live. And God knows how much money he spent with the other company
Right.
that got it up and running.
That's brutal.
So that's kind of like the very long, painful story of an example of what B2B e-commerce, the hard truth about B2B e-commerce
Yeah.
is. And who
Yeah.
knows like how he's doing, right? Like a whole site's probably like not even like who knows what bugs and things. I mean, right? Like we couldn't go through like final QA
Yeah.
because he had so does it, like, and I don't even know, like, there's so much more I could get into, but hopefully that gives you an example of what.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
When
it's almost like an interview for me. Like, who is working on this project? What, like, I'm like interviewing the customer to see if this is we're going to be successful with them at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you're dealing with these companies that are existing companies. They've done business a certain way, right? And this ties into
Yeah,
like what we talked about with you've got your sales team, you've been doing
yeah,
orders by fax, you did, but it's not just that. It's just the fact that they're a more established older business. They're used to doing things a certain way. They maybe don't
exactly.
understand modern software so much
No,
just
not at
because
all.
of the
Yeah.
nature of the business. And so then like understanding the fact that software is almost impossible to estimate is probably hard for them to wrap
Yeah,
their
and it's
heads
not
around.
impossible to estimate. Like, we've gotten very, very good at estimating, but there are things that change in the scope, and there are also things in the scope that they don't see as a scope change, but is a scope change, right? Like, it's very hard to write in the scope exactly how much work I'm going to do to help you get your product data into the system, right?
Yeah.
Let's say I estimate that it's going to take me 50 hours to consult with you, which is like a common estimate we have, where it's 50 hours to consult with you, help you figure out the attributes, set up like the format of the CSV file to import it, like the hand holding process of getting their product data, or maybe we do some of the work. But turns out, like, you just suck at product data and we need to spend 200 hours on that. Like, that's just a very hard thing to estimate and write in detail exactly what's in and out of scope. And there are things like that that we would deem out of scope. And then you get in battles with these companies because they're like, well, no, it's, you said you were going to do this. Because, like, writing words that match what's actually happening in software is very difficult.
Yeah.
And that's the part that's almost, some things are easier than others. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there there should be a podcast called Scope Battles where all you do is talk about like
Can we start that? Let's start it.
let's
Let's start
start it, dude.
that.
Like all you do is talk about scoping war stories, you know?
It's out of scope. It's out of scope.
Yeah. When it comes to product data, is it just that they tend to have so much more data, so many more products and SKUs
Yes.
as distributors than
There's
like
two there's okay. There's three problems. Or I'm trying to think of I'm doing this on the fly. I think there's three problems. So there's the number of data is definitely usually larger, but not always. But let's say on average it's larger. So you might have 100,000 SKUs versus like a retail site might have 1,000 SKUs. So that is it's just harder to like get that much data into the site. It's more work to like manage it. So that's number one. The number two is that they never had to historically have consumer facing product data. They might have had a
right,
catalog or they might have ERP. Most of these ERPs are like, you can have 25 characters for the title. They have like limits on characters
right.
and they don't have attributes and things that you need, or like, all these like colors and
Salespeople
sizes.
just translate it to a customer over the
Exactly.
phone
Or they
kind
have
of a thing.
a catalog in a PDF, but that's not in a structured data format that can be easily imported into the website. So that's number two. And number three is they have all this data coming from multiple sources. So let's say, especially if you're a distributor, you might have 50 different suppliers. I mean, that some have less, but let's just say even if you have 10 different suppliers, all need to give you your data. And then you have to normalize that data. Like Magento only has one data structure. You can't create like three different, I mean, you can create different attribute sets. So that's one way you could do it. But whether it's Shopify or BigCommerce or Magento or, Salesforce, whatever platform you choose, you have to get it all in the one data set. But those 10 suppliers are going to send you 10 different data sets, and they might both send you chairs, and one might say size and one might say chair size, or like it's the same thing but they'll have a different word.
Yeah.
So then you have to like normalize that. Who's going to do that? Is the e-commerce agency going to do that? Is that part of the scope? Do you see how, like, see how we get screwed over
Yeah.
all the time?
Now you're having to massage 10,000 CSV
Yeah,
files and
yeah,
deal
yeah,
with all
yeah,
sorts of madness. What are some of the like PIMs and tools around product data that
yeah.
like deal with those types of
Problems.
problems well?
Yeah. There's a lot of tools out there. I think there's more of these modern PIMs like Salsify, which is doing really well in the market. They're kind of becoming like the leader in PIM, but they're not necessarily solving the problem of having 20 different suppliers and bringing that data and normalizing it. I think they have professional services and they might help you with that process. but there's still kind of like a manual process that you have to go through that. I think there are some like data aggregation sources that have stuff like that. There's a company called oh man, it's blanking. I'm blanking on the name. There's companies you can buy like the data from, basically, where they basically are like an aggregator of data. And whereas Soulsify is kind of the opposite. It's like it's a tool for you to normalize your data, but you still have to like get your data into that.
Right.
There are other tools where you can basically buy the data from them. It's Eatalize. Eatalize is the company. We actually built. By the way, if anyone wants an integration to Eatalize to Magento, we just randomly built that one day because we were like, yeah, we got some extra bandwidth, and I think someone might need this, and no one's ever bought it from us. So if you buy your data from Eatalize, we have an extension where you can automatically import it into Magento. But sorry, that was just a quick little sales pitch for
Hey,
you.
I love it. I love it.
And I'll give it away cheap because I just want someone to use it, you know.
While supplies
But
last, call in while
yeah.
supplies last. I'm gonna flash the phone number here on the video.
But basically, you can like there's ones where you can like buy the data from them, and then there's companies that'll go out there and manually source the data, and they're just like they have cheap labor, and they'll be like, all right, we'll pay a bunch of guys in, South
Panama.
America $3, yeah, $3 an hour, and they'll get you like 100,000 SKUs into a CSV. So there's probably like 4 or 5 different ways, and there's professional companies that specialize in product data. There's a lot of ways to do it.
Right.
But there's no way around the fact that you have to put some sort of money and time into
Right.
it.
I wonder if like there's going to start to develop as this kind of segment of the market matures, some best practices around scoping and kind of staging out these products. Like I almost imagine like, hey, somebody comes and wants to do some stuff. Okay, step number one, how does your product data work? How does your product data look? Let's get your product data all figured out. That's one standalone project. You want to do it yourself? Cool, buddy. Get back to us once you're done,
So it's
right?
funny you said that because I've actually kind of created that.
Okay.
So basically, I call it the 5-step program. I don't know. I just made this up because we did a presentation on what we've learned from the podcast. And you don't necessarily have to do all 5 steps perfectly in order. And it doesn't mean if you do step one, you can't start step two or three, but it's the way that I would prioritize a project. So there's some pre-steps. It's like we call it the pre-step homework is have someone to run the project like me or you, like it's qualified, which is usually where people fail. They just like make some guy do the project that has no idea what he's doing. Like ideally you want someone that has some e-commerce experience. And then let's say you got that guy, then you need the platform, right? Whether it's Magento or Shopify or whatever. It doesn't really matter what e-commerce platform, as long as it's a good fit. Then you go through the 5 steps. So step one is product data. How do you get your like so if you don't have a ton of money to invest, and that's part of the problem is I think these companies think they don't understand the costs that go into this stuff. So like let's say you have 50 grand, that's probably only enough money to like just stand up a site and get your product data in the site and like not that much more else. Like you're not going to get like a super fancy design, you're not going to get like all these crazy features. So step one is product data, to your point, like normalizing it, getting it set up. And then step two is integrating with your back office, which might be more than just your ERP, but usually it's at least the ERP and other things so that like you can kind of like process payments efficiently and take orders. Obviously, there's kind of like the hidden step of processing payments. So that's kind of like we kind of consider that basic. Like you're going to set up a payment gateway and all that stuff. But let's say you got your product data and your integrations working. In theory, you have a working B2B site that can scale. Like you can, anyone can go on, buy your products, and then it'll automatically get sent to the ERP to process the order, right? And that could
Right.
be a lot more complicated than that in terms of like how that works. And then step three is basically like user working on the user. I always say user experience should be secondary with B2B because it's not like you don't need like this super like brand story website, right? Like a decent theme, like if you just like did like Luma, like the Magento Luma theme, or like a default, like there, I saw some nice big commerce themes. There's obviously lots of nice Shopify themes, and I'm sure some of the other platforms have nice themes. Like any of those are like generally better than almost every B2B e-commerce
Right.
website
Like by
in
a
the
mile,
world.
right?
Yeah, by like a mile. Just like put your logo and your colors. Like we'll spend like a little bit of time on like the user experience and just like make the theme look like your brand and better than what it is. And so user experience should come after you've got your product data and your integrations working well. Then maybe you can do more user experience research and talk to companies and try and get a better sense of some of like the user experience features they might need.
Right.
Then step four, I would say is, and that kind of goes hand in hand with that, is step four is improving your options for payment and shipping. So like you might start with just credit card, and maybe you offer like purchase order, but then you eventually want to have like, there's all these like sophisticated like pay after systems, like Afterpay. There's a B2B one called Approve that was on our podcast. There's ways that you could integrate into the ERP, so they have like a credit limit that's like tied to what you authorize them in the ERP.
Right.
And same thing with shipping. You could start to do like really complicated freight stuff. So that's step four. And then step five is integrating with external systems, including your clients. So this is like where it gets even more complicated, and people usually don't even know about this part of B2B commerce. Let's say you did all step one through four, you still might not get a lot of adoption. And the reason for that is because, like, if you're selling to Staples, for instance, Staples will use a system called Coupa or a similar system. It doesn't have to be Coupa, but Coupa is a procurement system. So they have to they that everything has to go through these systems. They might, or that maybe it's their ERP. So let's say they bought 10 chairs for you, then they have to go and put 10 chairs into their own system.
Mhm.
And they don't want to do that twice. They don't want to go on your website, buy 10 chairs, then go on their own system and put 10 chairs into their inventory.
Mhm.
So you need to sync up your e-commerce site with their systems. And that's
Of your
where a system like,
customers.
yes, and that's where a company like Punch Out to Go specializes in that. And they build those integrations, or they've kind of standardized some of that.
Mm.
And there's a lot more to it. Same thing with product data. Potentially, you could have some sort of integration with your supplier's product data or inventory feeds, so that you can like automatically like pull in feeds from other systems if, like, let's say you want to have like constant real-time updates from your supplier's data or something like that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's a lot you could do. That's step five. That's like, that's when you're the master of B2B commerce from my perspective. If you've done all step one through five and you're not successful, then you probably just have a really bad process issue with your salespeople and your processes, and
Man,
I don't
that's a lot. That's a lot.
know.
So you're I mean, the idea of integrating with like this Coupa or every different potential system that all your
Yeah.
customers use sounds insane.
I wouldn't do that with every customer. I would probably start, that would be more for the bigger customers. The smaller customers, you could almost treat them like wholesale B2C customers, like larger, maybe they get a tiered discount or a wholesale they will buy. They don't necessarily, they're not as enterprise, right? So
Yeah.
you're probably not going to do that with some guy that spends $500 a year with you. But if you have Staples or, $1 billion company buying from you, you're going
Yeah.
to want to do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And you mentioned the company Approve that you had on your podcast that does
Yes.
payments and different types of
They
payment
do,
options
basically they specialize in B2B payments, and it's very interesting. It's kind of like, almost like, it's hard to describe them, right? Like I'm not doing them justice at all. But I guess the way I would describe them is like, they're like, Afterpay, and what's the other popular ones,
Affirm,
like
the ones
Affirm.
that
It's
do
like,
like payment plans
yeah,
for
they're like that
consumers.
for B2B. Yeah, they're somewhat like that for B2B, and so they make it easier for your B2B customers to buy from you, from a payment perspective, and they help you with accounts receivable too. So they make it easier for you to get your
Gotcha.
revenue from the customers.
So
Yeah.
they kind of do the thing where like for me as the e-commerce merchant, I can sell to you as the customer and then you're on a payment plan, but I get all of my money up front or
Yes.
or
Exactly.
minus their
Yeah. Yeah.
fees or
Like,
whatever, and then
yeah.
they just handle
Exactly.
everything.
Yeah, like you've already gotten paid by Approve, and then I have to pay Approve, but Approve is taking on that risk of that customer. And I think they do some like real time credit checks. But like, I think it's possible that you could get denied. Like I could get denied from Approved. Like, hey, you're too risky. We're not going to take you on. Like, you never pay your bills. So like,
Right,
they're doing some of that. Like you don't want to be a bank, right? Like I don't want to be a bank. And
right.
sometimes I think you've talked about this, right? How
Yeah.
agencies end up being banks for their customers, and it's not a good business to be in, right? Because we're not banks. We can't like send what do banks do when you don't pay? They send like the repo man. Like I don't
Right.
have the repo man on, to go take your car from you and like go like take your home. Like I can't do that.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's crazy that happens. Have you looked at using any of those options for yourself for Trellis? Have you looked at any of those payment
We've
options?
looked at it. Nothing has really worked the way that we've wanted it to, and we've done a good enough job with accounts receivable and estimating, and we've
Breaking
fixed
down
a
the
lot of
knees
those.
from time to time and, yeah, send a message.
We haven't had to do that. We've had to do some negotiating, and sometimes we've messed up, right? Like if there are times where we've made an honest mistake, we'll credit the customer, and we're like, we don't mind doing that. But then we look at that, like how, like obviously the amount that we should be doing that, we want to see that going down. We want to be getting better and better. And so we've gotten pretty good at that at collections in general. But if there was a great solution for that, we would be. It's something we'd be interested in. It's just the ones that we saw, the fees were too high, or the process was too cumbersome. There were too many problems with the process
Right,
impeding what we do that it just wasn't worth it. So,
right.
if someone has a solution for that for an agency that's like a QuickBooks app, let me know because
Okay,
there's a couple things out there that do exist, but they charge like insane fees, and like we collect at such a high rate that the fees just weren't
right.
worth it.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure I mean, I can imagine, again, another one of those things where a company that's been around for a while, all of a sudden you say, "Hey, we're gonna charge you," I don't know what it is, 10%, 5%, whatever the percentage is. They're gonna be like, "No, we'll keep doing it the way we've been doing it," you know? That
Yeah,
could be a difficult sell. Um, and last question I got to ask you. This was a tweet that
yeah,
I
yeah.
was very curious about. You said two things, and you sort of mentioned the chicken and egg thing already, but you said two things make a great CEO: solving the prisoner's dilemma within your company and solving the chicken and egg problem. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
very curious to understand this a little better.
Yeah, I love the prisoner's dilemma. Like I was so what I was actually going to get my PhD in economics, or at least I was exploring that at one
Oh
point.
wow.
And one of the classes that I took in undergrad, I only did undergrad, by the way. I'm very happy that I did not go back to school, by the way. I hate school, but I was like, I kind of want like, there's like, but I'm good at it, and I was like, there was
I was the
something an
same
interest there.
way. I was the same way.
Yeah,
I was really good in school, almost straight A, basically straight A's, and then they wanted me to get a PhD, and I was just done. Like I had zoned
yeah,
in
it's
so
a
hard, I was just
brutal
done.
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we made the right
I
choice.
think so. I think so.
We should create our own PhD program, Isaiah, and the Commerce Hero Trellis e-commerce PhD, and then
I like it. I like it.
So, anyways, one of the things that got me really interested in the prisoner's dilemma is just I took a class, game theory and economics. It was one of my economics classes, and it's an interesting economics concept because basically what it proves, and a lot of people don't really. It's funny because there's like two mentalities, right, in economics. You have the capitalism, like free market, like solves all our problems mentality, and then you have like the communism mentality, which most people see as really evil in America for the most part, right? Would you agree that that's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
evil Russia and China?
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
can
the
agree.
prisoner's dilemma is basically saying that both are wrong. And basically what it's proving is that some scenarios, everyone doing what's best for themselves creates the best scenario. Some scenarios, everyone what's doing best for themselves does not create the best scenario. And I think a good example of that is like
Mhm,
global warming, right?
mhm.
Like it's inconvenient for me to recycle, but if everyone doesn't recycle, we're kind of like screwing the environment,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
if everyone took the 5 minutes and if only one person recycles, it's useless, right? Because you need, so
yeah,
that's the prisoner dilemma is basically like if everyone did something in unison, it actually creates a better outcome, but only if everyone does
yeah,
something. So
yeah,
are you familiar with this?
yeah.
I'm trying to explain it in a basic
Yeah,
way
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
people that
yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah.
don't know it.
Yeah.
So as a CEO, you're constantly battling with this internally and externally with clients. You're essentially like just playing game theory. You just don't realize that you're playing game theory.
Mm,
So what you're doing is you're like, well, you're constantly in negotiations with clients and vendors, and even also trying to get your own employees on board with your own ideas and motivations, right? Like, and there's like a battle of just trying to get like you can't control everyone, right? Like I can't control my vendors, I can't control my clients, I can't even control my employees. I can give them advice or give them orders, but they could just not like I don't know we're remote, right? Like I don't know what everyone's doing all day. Like
yeah,
I see their time tracking, but I'm not like watching their computer. So you're essentially like taking bets on what they will do, and then that should also influence what you should do. And so you're kind of like trying to optimize the total outcome. And that sometimes is trying to get everyone to work together and choose, maybe do a slight sacrifice. A good example is we have 4 owners, so I try and get all of our owners to sacrifice a little bit of like salary to like reinvest in the company, and it's like a challenge, right? Everyone individually wants to get paid more, but like if we all sacrifice a certain amount, it'll lead us to the best outcome, right?
Right.
So, and same thing with employees, right? Of course, employees want to get raises, but if you gave everyone a huge raise, you might not be profitable, right?
Right.
So, how do you like get the optimal raises that keep people motivated, but and keep everyone working together? So you're constantly just working in the prisoner's dilemma. And then it kind of ties into the chicken or the egg problem, which is like I look at it mainly around expanding services. Like typically, you're going to hit a saturation point in anything you do, right? You like if you only do this kind of thing, eventually you hit a saturation point, right? And sometimes that saturation point can be really big, or like if you're lucky, you're in a big market and you know you can go really far with it. But I mean, Uber is a good example. Like Uber probably would be like almost a dead company if they hadn't done Uber Eats right now. Like imagine if
Right.
Uber didn't have Uber Eats right now and
Right.
they just had Uber. Like no one's taken it. I've taken like 2 Ubers since COVID, and one of them was because my girlfriend blocked me into my driveway and took her keys, so I couldn't. I had to take an Uber, and so so I literally had to take an Uber to pick her up to come bring back her keys, so that. But yeah, Uber Eats saved them, right? And they diversified. But it's like the chicken or the egg problem is how do we build demand or create a new service, but we don't have expertise in that new thing, right? And it's like, but like if I don't have expertise in that, no one's going to want to buy from me. But
Right.
then do I invest a bunch in getting expertise, but I'm not making any money from it? And then it's like I'm basically investing all this thing, and I don't know when it's going to pay me back.
Right.
So you're essentially constantly trying to solve the chicken or the egg problem. Like, okay,
Right.
we need this new hire, but we can't afford them yet. So how do we solve that problem or make more money? And like that's a bottleneck. How do we solve that bottleneck until we can afford to hire that person? But that bottleneck is causing us to lose the money that we need to hire that person,
Right.
right? So that's all
It's interesting.
basically I'm doing all day.
I love it. Yeah, like the headless thing you mentioned was a great example of
Yeah.
that, where you want to do more of those, but until you're doing a ton of, yeah, it's
Until you're doing a ton of them, the economy of scale isn't high enough for us to get the price down.
yeah,
But if
yeah,
everyone did headless, the world would be a better place, right? It's the prisoner's dilemma.
that's right. Well, Isaiah, this is a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you taking some time.
For sure.
Where is the best place for people to find you online?
Yeah, just our website, trellis.co. It's .co for people that aren't familiar with .co. Unfortunately, we couldn't get .com. We could do a separate podcast and we'll talk about that.
All right.
So trellis.co, and if you send us on the contact form, we usually respond. And then just LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm pretty active like you are, so I think we've been doing a pretty good job on Twitter, so I appreciate that. All your retweets are helping me slowly
Awesome.
slowly get more followers.
Awesome, man.
So
All right, man. Good stuff. I'll talk to you soon. And everybody
all
make sure
right,
to
thank
check
you.
out the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce podcast.
Absolutely. When are we gonna get you on though?
Yeah, we
You're
got to
gonna have
figure
to
that
join.
out. I don't know how much I can help you, but we'll have to figure that out.